let's go ahead and kick off. I would love for our two speakers to kick us off with some introductions. Dan, would you like to go first?
Yeah, sure. Glad to see everyone here. I guess I can't see anyone, but glad everyone's here. I'm Dan, the CFO at Mercury. Been at Mercury for about 3 years. I was the first finance hire to help build out like the finance function. Joined when we were about 300 or so people. We are approaching 900, so it's been quite a journey. I've been in startups. This is my third startup I've been a part of. I've been in startups for a better part of a decade now. I've been at, bigger startups, including Square, like pre-IPO, post-IPO, and then the startup after that was like a 30-person startup. So I've seen kind of all phases from like really early stage to public company, tech companies as well.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Tomer. I'm one of the founders of Gusto. Gusto helps over 400,000 small businesses today to start, build, grow their team. We help people with payroll and benefits and HR and anything around building your team. We started the company 12 years ago now. So, when we started, it was just the three of us, and now Gusto is around 2,700 people. The world that I've been, contributing and leading in the company is product, design, data science. But we're going to talk a lot about talent today, and I think in any company, the most important thing is talent. So it's a topic that I care tremendously about.
Awesome. Thank you both. All right, let's go ahead and get started. The first question we've got today, and by the way, thank you to everybody who's in the audience who did submit questions with your RSVPs. Many of those are going to be addressed today, so we really appreciate that. The first question we're going to start with is, what are the most common hiring or compensation missteps that you see early stage founders make?
I have so many. So the most common, so there's a bunch of them. Maybe I'll start then and I'll jump in and maybe we can kind of popcorn. So, I before Gusto, I had a different software company that I was a founder of. This is back in Israel. I'm originally from Israel, and we ran it for a few years, and it ended up failing, shutting down, and then I moved here to the US. So I made a bunch of mistakes around talent in that first company that I can talk about, and then you learn a lot from the mistakes, and then we can talk about that a little bit. So one of the mistakes is people hiring brilliant jerks. And that happens sometimes when you are, you really need, let's say you're like a software engineer, a designer, you really need to bring in someone on the team. You are, you just feel like, that the most important thing is to get the job done. And you forget about the values, and you don't put down even the values. You kind of have it in the back of your mind. You're noticing that this person may not be exactly right, and they're kind of a little bit different, but you're the sort of person that works well with a lot of type of people. So you say, it would work. Let's just see kind of how it works. I think what ends up happening when you do that is you may get some work done on a very, very in the very first short term. But the truth is that the first few people in the company really set the stage for what this company is about, the community, how it feels like to go into work, how does it feel like to collaborate. And if you make mistakes around, the sort of, values that you bring people with, and values is something that you come from home, it's really hard for a small company to teach people values. That's just really not our job. If you make that mistake, it could really set your company's path on the wrong path. I think the way of fixing it, the way of kind of being ahead of it, is to sit down together with your co-founder. It shouldn't take a lot of time, like to come up with your values. If you're just a few people, just sit down, in your coffee shop for 30 minutes, 1 hour. Ask yourself, like, what do you appreciate about each other? What do you like about each other? What do you want to do more of? What do you want to see more of when you hire? And put down 3 or 4 things that are just must-haves. And then put them down and make sure that in the interview process, because there has to be an interview process. That's another mistake of not having a process, but I'll just talk about it for a second. In the interview process, you need to ask questions that talk about each one of these values, and never skip that. And I think when you have it written down, you can be honest with yourself about, like, is this person right or wrong? If you don't have it written down, you can just kind of like hand wave it and hope for the best, and that doesn't work. That would be one out of multiple different mistakes I've seen.
Yeah, there's so much to build on there. I think especially when you're earlier stage, there's like this sense of scarcity, right? Because it feels like there's so much work to be done. So you could feel rushed into making these hires that, like, ultimately, like, you're living with these people ideally for years and years, right? So like optimizing for how do I get someone in the seat, like a few weeks or even like a few months sooner, that feels so like critical when you're in that recruiting phase, but it really does have these like reverberating repercussions down the road. So plus one to like just being really, really intentional about the hires that you make. I think like a common mistake I see with like founders is like calibrating incorrectly in terms of how senior or junior of a hire to make. Sometimes like, you want to be proactive and get like really, really great talent. So you hire that person who is like a SVP at Google or Facebook, right? When you're a 10-person company, it's like, that's probably not the right move in most cases, right? Maybe there are certain cases where like that might make sense, but you do want to hire people who come in, actually be effective and get the job done and not feel like they have to come in and now have to go hire 10 people from like their prior team for them to actually be able to get anything done, right? Which obviously leads to a lot of bloat and so on. I think like hiring for people based upon like the prestige of their resume, I think oftentimes is a big mistake. I think it does require a lot of skill in the interview process, right? Of how do you dig deeper behind like the way that they tell the story? Because a lot of times like these people are going to be really great at selling themselves, but how do you really dig in to get a sense for whether they truly can do the set of work that you need to be done at your company over like call it the next like 2-3 years or so? I think the other mistake people make is like you hire too junior because you're very cost conscious and maybe you like overcorrect on this like first point, right? And you've quickly realized like after 6 months or so you've like quickly scaled out of this person or hire that you've made and like they're not scaling well. It leads to like a lot of like potentially can lead to a lot of like imposter syndrome type like driven type of behavior that leads to like kind of like toxic behavior. And I think like just getting that calibration right of like, hey, what is like the right level of talent? Doesn't mean that you should always try to go for a Goldilocks. Sometimes you should lead in more senior. Sometimes you should lead in more junior. I think it's just like that being a little bit intentional about where you decide to land for each role that you're hiring for.
Yeah, totally. I'll add even more to that. Like, I think, to this kind of two types of mistakes, like hiring too junior or hiring too senior in the early days, I would say I much rather make the mistake of hiring too junior than hiring too senior because as a founder, you have an ability to test and understand the work better when the person is a junior person. Whereas with the senior person, the mistake is like sometimes you look at their work like, wow, it looks so fancy and wonderful. Like maybe I'm the problem. I don't understand, why this is important for us to do. So I would say if I had to pick, I would say to go to kind of more on the junior side. Then the second thing is I think, look at the work, the actual work product of people that you interview. So in the world of engineering and product and design, it's kind of easy actually. Just look at the product that they've built, look at code bases that they wrote, have them sit down next to them, see them write code. Like there's nothing or design, there's nothing better than that. You can do that in marketing and as well. But one of the things that I think people struggle with sometimes is, hiring for roles that they've never actually had experience in. Like if you were never a salesperson, how do you hire a seller? Right? If you were never, a finance person, how do you hire a finance person? And I think for that, like the two practical tips. One is it's smart to kind of slowly build up some sort of like at least one or two people in the industry that maybe they would never work for you because they are working somewhere else, they're very happy, but you think they're really good and they can help you understand what good looks like. So just speaking with them and understand that can help you understand what good looks like. The second thing is have them, if they agree, to meet a couple of candidates. It's usually kind of really fun. It doesn't take too long. And if they're, you kind of build that relationship, you can get them to do this. And, by the time you see several candidates, you hear several kind of pieces of feedback, you're going to start kind of understanding yourself, like what good looks like and how to judge. Maybe the
I
last
love
thing, actually, this is a topic I care a lot about. Last thing, Mallory. It's really important to talk about also when you need to fire someone, because we're just talking about hiring here, and the truth is that hiring has to have some sort of a QA process, and the QA is performance management, and that means really looking at someone's work, providing them feedback every single week, give them an opportunity to be successful, but also be honest with them when things don't work out and kind of make that change. I have almost never heard of anyone who exited a team member and felt like it was too early. It was always too late. It's always, people feel like it takes longer than what they, in retrospect, they would have liked.
100%. Yeah. The second piece of this question, I think, is also interesting, particularly in relation to some of this leveling conversation, but the part about compensation mishaps. So thinking about when we're thinking about hiring, what are some mistakes that you see founders frequently make with compensation for their teams early on?
I think compensation is in some ways a reflection of the motivations of the people that you hire. as well, right? And I think not having a philosophy of what your game is, like if you try to play the game of like Facebook or OpenAI and hey, I'm going to try to compete on cash comp, you're likely not going to win as a startup founder, right? But if you also try to play the game of like, hey, I'm going to give you like a ton of equity, but like really low on cash, but they're not co-founders, that also might not make sense either. So I think just having like a specific philosophy of, here are the type of people that I want to go hire, and like, how do I think about a compensation philosophy that maps to what you really want, right? Like, if you're talking about hiring like your first few people who are starting up a new function, right? You want people with like really strong ownership mentality. So maybe you are leaning more into equity, and you could always make comp adjustments down the road, right? I think a lot of times people think like, oh my God, making a compensation decision and it feels so final, but like these things evolve and change so much over time. So I think having a specific point of view of like how do you actually want to approach compensation and like what type of people do you want to attract with that compensation level, and like be okay losing people because of compensation, whether it's on cash or equity or elsewhere. And yeah, like having that actually be like a little bit of like a opt-out filter too for like the type of people that you want to go build a company with.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. I'd say, no one, I think people should not expect to get rich from their cash comp in a small kind of early stage startup. Cash comp should not be the big component. Like in a small startup, it's really the dream, it's the equity, it's like the dream that, hey, we're going to build something really, really amazing and special. And that's how I might get rewarded. But on the other hand, it's also people, in my experience, join startups in early stage. It's less about compensation in general, and it's more about the adventure, the community, the experience, the learnings that you can get from that experience. And I think, to your point, like people know that they can go work for OpenAI or Facebook or Google and for 2, 3 years and make much more money and a much more kind of I guess cash comp for sure. But like these are the sort of folks who opt into the special adventure. We're like, yeah, there's a likelihood. I believe in the company. There's a likelihood that it's going to be a massively profitable thing for me to actually join this company. But also knowing that it's not the one thing. It's never like the number one kind of priority for folks early on. Um, I will say that one caveat to this, which is it is your job as a founder when you sit down and have the compensation conversation with the candidate, in addition to explaining them the philosophy that Dan talked about, like, hey, here's our philosophy, here's how we do the things here, and it's consistent across everyone. In addition to that, it's your job to paint a picture of the future you're trying to build. Like, hey, if we are successful building this special company, here's how big this could be. I can't promise you anything, and I can't even put percentage points of like, the likelihood. But this is what we're trying to do. And if we're successful, this is how it's going to look like. And then your equity might be worth this. Again, you cannot commit to it. But I think the mistake here that people sometimes make is they don't even talk about it. And it's like, I don't know, I got like 10,000, stock options in my offer, but I have no idea as a candidate how to value them. I don't know what they might be worth. That would be a mistake.
Yeah, I think this next question actually just builds on that, and you started to answer it there, which is what are some tactics that early stage founders can use in order to develop competitive compensation packages, given that they probably have some limited resources? So we know that equity is one of those, and to your point, like really illustrating the potential value of that equity. What else might you think about when you're putting together kind of a compensation package for a candidate at the early stage?
Yeah, I think one thing that's been really nice at our story at Gusto is to, in addition to what would be standard benefits like health insurance or 401(k) and things like that, think about non-standard benefits, things that are very special for you and for your company and for your story and for your culture. And it's a way for you to emphasize the things that you care about. So for example, at Gusto, one of our values is around community and us kind of, spending a lot of time together and enjoying each other's company. So one of the rituals we do actually, we've had in the early days for the first 10 years in the company is everybody takes their shoes off in the beginning, in the entrance to the office. So when you go into any Gusto office today, San Francisco, New York, Denver, other places, there's this huge wall of cubbies where people can put their shoes on, put slippers on, and then walk around the office. And the idea here is because we started a company and in our home we take our shoes off, and then we so had like our first employees also do the same, and then we felt like, hey, this is actually a really nice signal. So we kind of kept going with that. So the benefits, kind of part of it, is that there's also a slippers benefit at Gusto. So you get $30 when you join into Gusto to specifically buy slippers and kind of be a part of this ritual in this community. Today we have a stipend for AI, for example, for AI tooling every year, because we want people to use the most advanced AI at their home and even outside of work. So I would say think about benefits as a way for you to look at the values, the things that you care about, and put your money where your mouth is.
Yeah, it plays a big part in the type of culture that you want to build up to. Just like those little things that you emphasize. Like at Mercury, we like to, we're like big on tea here and poetry, and like it's part of like the onboarding kit for everyone. They get a nice box that's like curated with like a little bit of like your typical swag, but you also get a nice like packet of tea that's like very like I'm the CFO, so I think it's too expensive, but it's very nice tea. And you also get like, typically like a poetry book or something, right? It just like speaks to the kind of values that we really like espouse as a company, as well as like Mercury really focused on like craft and how do we do things at like a really high quality. So I think those things go a pretty long way in terms of selling people, in terms of not just the job that they're signing up to, but also like the group of people that they're committing, hours and hours and like hopefully like years to actually spending time with as well. The two other things that I would mention outside of just like hard currency of cash and equity are also especially if you are getting someone who's like really high potential, maybe up and covered, that you're putting into a little bit more of a senior role than they're used to. I think like treating scope and impact and also like title as currencies could be really helpful as well. You don't want to hire someone at an early stage that's really focused on title, right? But if you are able to give them to someone like, hey, like maybe they were just like talking about my world, right? Like maybe they ran like FP&A, but have never really run all of finance before, right? Like, how do you think about giving like those type of opportunities to people? And like, you obviously want to make sure there's enough there that you could actually trust them with it. But if you think like they actually could grow into it, usually those can be like really, really high motivators for people. And they'll typically be like very much engaged in the job versus like someone coming in like purely because of like the compensation that you're offering.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, the next one is specifically for Tomer. How should founders think about evolving their payroll and benefits as the company grows? So we're talking about benefits now, we're talking about comp, like how should founders think about between day one and the future of their company, how that might evolve?
Yeah, totally. I think so two things. One, in the world of payroll, as you grow, you might hire people across multiple states in the US. You might hire people across multiple countries in the world. So international becomes more and more important. Multi-location, multi-state becomes more and more important. So that's just something that modern systems like Gusto really help you do. So with Gusto, for example, you could pay anyone in any state, in any country in the world, hire them and make sure that the whole experience of onboarding and payroll and benefits, the whole thing is kind of a part of the same system. So I would say that's one thing to consider as you kind of grow your team. In terms of benefits, that definitely changes. So in the early days, perhaps it's health insurance. That's kind of the major benefit that you have, and then over time, people kind of expect 401k as well. But like the thing and then health insurance itself changes. There's lots of different modes of health insurance. So in the early days, you could perhaps only offer small group health insurance, which is then later on you can offer large group, and then there's like other modes of health insurance. So you need to make sure that you work with brokers that can evolve with you. That's like I would say the tip around there. And then again, Gusto does this for you at our system. And then kind of more into the process side of things, I think it's really important once you start having people in the company for 6 to 9 months to start putting down like a leveling process. And what that means is, and again, it shouldn't take a lot of time. This is not like a whole year process that like they do perhaps like it's like big companies. It could be, just like one afternoon, you're sitting with your management team and you're putting down, here's the 4 levels, let's say to start, of every role. The 4 levels, like an engineer, L1, 2, 3, 4, of 4 levels in marketing and sales and so forth. And each one of them you put down what are the characteristics of somebody who comes in as a level 1, 2, 3, or 4. And each one of these levels have specific ranges in terms of their compensation. So these are the sort of stuff that you can use to create fairness, because I think it's important in compensation to assume that everyone knows everything. Even if you think that everyone tells you they're not speaking with one another, they are, and they should, and it's okay. It's okay for people to talk, kind of compare notes about their compensation. Also now there's multiple states have specific rules around transparency that you actually have to disclose how much specific job pays. So just assume that everybody knows everything. And that's good because then you can just create like a system that's just with ranges, with levels. It's very fair. It's very specific of why somebody is a level 3 versus level 5. You're going to keep evolving it every single year. So to Dan's point earlier, it's not that you set it up and that's it. You're going to keep evolving, making it better, and use that as a system of accountability for yourself to make sure that you're not biased and to make sure that you're fair with your whole team.
I've used Gusto across 2 different companies now, and I've always like loved the experience of it. I think the other aspect of the system, it doesn't just help you do the thing and then, like make it more efficient and seamless. It also helps you stay compliant. I think when you're a founder, you start going into new areas like HR compliance. Like, what does it mean to like manage cash and like all these like what does it mean to like build compensation policies? All these things that you probably have like never really dealt with before. And I think using the right system from like the right like partner slash vendor. I really like to think about all like vendors as like partners, like can really help you like get educated on that front and actually stay compliant on these things. So being mindful of like the systems that you actually go use, not only just makes your life easier, but like can actually help you operate in fields that you might not have expertise as well. On the benefit side, I mean, we've seen this at Mercury. When I joined Mercury, we were like 300 people, and like now we are like 900-ish people or so. The like range of people that you start hiring gets like a lot more diverse. And I think that's part of the fun of actually seeing a company grow, right? You just get people from like really diverse like backgrounds and like different interests and so on. I think like with that, the types of benefits that people care about will change over time, right? When you're like really early stage, like just giving like risk appetite to people who are, maybe have families versus not, like you typically don't have like a lot of like, parents or like soon to be parents or like really early stage startups. Maybe that's a little bit of a generalization, but things like paternity benefits like start mattering a lot more so when you start, hiring more people and so on that like may not have like really resonated for early stage. So just keeping a pulse on your employee base and like understanding what they really care about, I think goes a really, really long way, especially as like, you might think of your early cadre of like startup like employees and like, that mix and like color like really starts changing over time, making sure you have like a good pulse on your employees over time as well.
Yeah, Dan, I feel like that's a really great point that a lot of times founders don't realize that the opinions in the room are changing as the company is growing. And so I think like Mercury's always done a really good job of doing that annual kind of pulse check of like, hey, what does everyone care about? And like, are those things changing or shifting over time with both the ecosystem and like what's happening in the world and also the demographics that are at the company. So I love that point. Okay.
I
The
want
next
to
question. Oh, yeah,
just
yeah, go
jumping
ahead.
on the parental stuff because I think that's like it's quite an interesting one. I think people take cues. So there's putting down the benefits and there's actually using the benefits. And people take cues from leadership around like, what do we actually do here? Okay, great. So you have like 3 weeks, PTO of a year, but like the founder never takes time off. So, well, that's going to trickle down and people are going to feel really, bad about taking time off, for example. Same thing with parental leave. So my advice is to be mindful of that and make sure that you want to set the example as the leader as leadership in the company on what how you want the experience to be an employee of the company like. And if you put benefits for people to use them, you should use them yourself and show why this is important. I feel like at Gusto at least we don't want people to burn out. We want people to be successful, to build their careers, to do amazing things here, and to stay for a long, long time. And from the financial standpoint, with Mercury's CFO here on the call, I'll say that that's also quite an effective way of leading a team, leading a business, where you have people stick around for a long time, and they're able to create contributions for over a long period of time, having a lot of context on what's going on in the company. That's going to make people really effective. Last thing about compliance thing that you mentioned, one of the things that really blew my mind when we started Gusto is this statistic that a third of businesses every year in the US get fined from the government for doing payroll incorrectly. That was insane to me. A third of companies, right? Every single year. So, the reason is it's not that, the business owners are irresponsible and they're trying to evade the rules and the law. Absolutely not. It's because the rules and the law are just so freaking complicated. So you have to have either like an expert or staff, or that you use, like a system that, that offers and does that for you.
Okay. Next one we've got is how do you map hiring decisions to your company's business milestones?
Yeah, I think the term mapping is right. I think the way that a lot of founders typically make hiring decisions is like, oh, this person on my team is asking for a hire, this person is asking, and then you kind of make these ad hoc decisions along the way. I think in the world of infinite resources, probably is okay, but I think like running a business, you have finite resources, right? And the person who is first at your door, like that hire they're asking for, might not be the most important thing that you need to go do, right? So I think having like a really clear sense for what do I want to go achieve this year, and like what is the actual work that needs to get done for me to go achieve those things, and like how do I think about prioritization of like hires to go get that work done, and just having like a basic map in your head of what this looks like goes a really really long way, so that you don't find yourself spending money on hires that like might seem important but are probably like a lot less important versus other things that really help your business like hit the goal. So I know in like early stages, it could feel like, oh, like having a hiring plan feels like so big company and lame and so on, but it goes a really, really long way to make sure that you all are putting resources in the way that makes the most sense.
Yeah, and if you had to make a mistake for of under hiring versus over hiring, I would say that under hiring is a much better mistake to make. It just gets people to flex, think cross-functionally, become better problem solving across the board, think about the company as a whole. When you overhire, the issue is it becomes really culturally toxic. It could become culturally toxic, political. People don't want to step on each other's toes and stuff like that. So it's much better to be kind of constantly always understaffed than constantly always overstaffed.
One question beneath this question that I hear a lot from founders that I'm curious about is when do you think a founder should hire sales and marketing versus doing sales and marketing themselves? And maybe Tomer, you can weigh in on this one as a founder.
Yeah, I think the founder sales. So I think sales and marketing are two different things. So one is when you as a founder, like in the beginning, your big job is to find product market fit. That's the most important thing. So you need to find. So what does that mean? It's not just building the right product. It's understanding the customer need, understanding how customers speak about their need, understanding what type of customers this is relevant for. So the more time you have with customers, the more time you have out there in the market speaking with potential customers, the better it is for you to build your intuition and understanding of the customer, the problem, and how your solution kind of focuses on that and enables that to be to happen. I think on the go-to-market side, once you have something that starts working, that you're feeling, okay, we got something here, right? And that's, it's not as black or white. The next day you feel like things are starting to work, but rather when you start feeling that, this is kind of getting boring. Every single day I talk with customers, I know exactly what they're going to say. And I know really quickly within a couple of minutes whether this is gonna convert or not. And it's just became really repetitive. That is the moment where you want to actually build a system and build a machine behind your go-to-market, right? And the machine can include marketing, can include sales, kind of depending on the type of product you have and what's your budget for cost of customer acquisition. At Gusto, for the majority of our life as a company, it's much more product led growth and marketing led growth as opposed to like sales led growth. And now we're doing sales too. So it really kind of depends on your ACV, which is your annual contract value of how much, and which then leads to the budget that you have to actually spend on acquiring a customer. So that's something to be mindful of. Like, I wonder what's Dan's take about on this, but like my rule of thumb would be if your ACV, if you make from a customer, call it like $10,000 and above, it's a smart idea to kind of incorporate sales and think about sales as a go-to-market engine. And that's kind of assuming high margin business here, high margin software business. But if you're under 10,000, it's becoming more difficult. If you're under 3,000, then you should just probably do no touch point sales, go to market entirely.
Yeah, makes sense to me. As someone who gets brought in by the founder once they feel like uncomfortable in these areas, I actually always appreciated founders who've leaned into their areas of discomfort as well. I think a lot of times as founders, it's easy to say like, oh, I haven't been a marketing person before. I should go hire someone to go do marketing versus actually leading into that discomfort and really trying to learn the craft of it. It'll actually make you way more effective in terms of managing that person that you hire to run marketing eventually as well. And I think it'll just give you like a better like feel for like how your company should scale up over time. So I mean, like thing that I've always appreciated is like, yeah, like work with founders, or if you are a founder, just like lead into those areas and discover, and just like go into it with like a hungry, curious attitude, right? Like just like, hey, like I might not be the expert in this field, but like none of these fields are typically rocket science unless you're trying to learn engineering. You should probably go hire an engineer, right? But otherwise, like, yeah, none of these fields are rocket science. A lot of them are just about like intuitive good sense, like being focused on the customer, like being sensible about business decisions and so on. Yeah.
And also, I would say the first generation of sales folks that you bring into the team and marketers are much less as like they're unique. They have the special characteristics that you want, which is yes, they're sellers, yes, they're marketers, but they're also researchers. They need to be really good in understanding the patterns that they're seeing from customers in their interactions and from the data, and bring it back to the team around like, build it. What should we build differently? How should we speak about things differently? So perhaps they're not the best sellers on the planet, actually, but they could be really, really good in bringing in those insights and help us kind of run the product different. There's like an article by Mark Leslie about this. I forgot the name, but I'll share it later. I think the sales curve, the startup sales curve, that talks exactly about that.
Awesome. While we're talking about scaling responsibly, Dan, I'm going to direct this one to you. How should we think about managing cash flow while scaling headcount? We started to talk about this a little bit, but would love a little bit of a deep dive there.
Yeah. I think one is like make sure you're measuring and managing cash flow, period. Right. I think I talk to a lot of founders where you do this math of like, oh, like how much did I spend last month? Did I divide your cash balance by like that burn, and like think like that's actually your runway, and like you might have like 10 signed offers for people to start next month, and like those people are going to materially change what your overall cash flow looks like, right? So you don't have to be a financial expert. Like a lot of this stuff is common sense, but like really just understanding what are the decisions and commitments that you've made, and how does that snowball in terms of really understanding your fuller financial picture over time goes a really long way. It just takes like a little bit of extra time to really be thoughtful about like your company's like burn and cash flow. And then once you have like a good sense for that, then like, yeah, like think about like, hey, like, what we were talking about before, like what are the hiring decisions that we do want to go make? And like, do I need to make those hires? Like test every single decision, test every single like ask that your team comes with as well. I think a lot of times when you're starting up a company, you could find yourself a little bit in like employee appeasement mode. It's like, oh, I'm so grateful and thankful that people are like going on this journey with me. I have to keep them happy. And like, that's actually like a totally wrong way to think about it, right? You do want to continue to maintain a certain level of rigor in every single business decision that gets made, because there's a lot of fancy frameworks and like metrics that you can use around like cash runway and like a lot of different like types of metrics depending on industry and so on. But a lot of that just comes down to like how do you make sensible decisions on like spend, right? Like the way that you would think about your own personal budget, and like how do you make sure like you're not being like overly optimistic on top line so that your spend actually makes sense relative to your top line, and then how much liquidity and like cash balance you actually have to like manage and like see that through. So just being able to connect like those three dots of like, what do you think like your sales outlook actually looks like? What does your spend look like? If like I think for I don't know what to make of the audience here, but for your tech company, it's probably going to be a lot of like people related expenses, and like so a lot of that comes out to hiring decisions that you actually go make. And then how does that look relative to your cash balance? And just making sure you have like a simple framework to marry these three things up and like really understand what your runway looks like over time.
Tomer, sound right to you?
Sounds great.
Cool. Let's chat about still hiring, but thinking about, again, kind of like how we do that today versus thinking about the future. How do you think about striking the right balance between hiring for today's needs versus planning for future growth?
Yeah, I think the timeline I like is 18 months to think about somebody's competency. So in a high growth startup, it's really hard to predict what you're going to need 3 years from now. And sure, again, as I said in the beginning, we want people to stay in a company for many, many years, but it's hard to predict in day one when you just meet them. And I would prefer again to make the mistake of hiring for someone too junior than to hiring someone too senior. So you kind of bring this in together. The question that I have in my mind when hiring, and that's also in the kind of early days, although, I would say it took me a while until I just put these things in words, is, you want two things for the hire. The first thing is that you want to make sure that day one, they can contribute in actual work that ends up in front of a customer, not theoretical stuff, actual thing that they're going to craft and build and create. They don't need to come in and hire people to do work. They can do the work. So that's number one. Number two is you want to believe that if you look at the big projects that you believe they're going to need to do in the next 18 months, you believe they could be the person to go and do that. So that's usually a little bit more strategic, a little bit more planning oriented, putting principles down, creating systems and things like that. Beyond 18 months, it's just really hard to know. So that's usually kind of how I would think about the kind of the timeline around hiring.
I think a lot of times in hiring, I mean, I experience this on my team all the time. We're still like a relatively like smallish finance team. You want the person who could do like all the work, roll up their sleeves, and like actually get shit done. But you also like ideally want them to be able to scale up, and they could run teams and like manage people over time as well. And a lot of times you're looking for a bit of a Goldilocks type of scenario, not higher. So I agree with like Tomer, bias towards someone who is more junior can actually get the work done, but be really thoughtful in your interview process of like, hey, do I think this person is high potential? Like, how do you actually go about gauging whether someone is high potential or not? To at least like maybe not have 100% certainty that they could scale up into the role that you might need in 3 years' time. But at least like give yourself a probability bet that they can grow into that versus like solely only hiring for like the set of like criteria you're looking for like the next 3 or 6 months.
Great. I read this question and I thought about it a different way too, which is like, how do you deal with the like philosophical dilemma of if I hire this person, more revenue will come, and like, can I outspend myself a little bit like to make that bet on that revenue? Does that resonate? Like, how do you think about that when it comes to hiring?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we're talking about this at Mercury too, where I mean, Mercury like historically been a lot focused on tech startups, and like this year we're really making a push into e-commerce, professional services, a lot of like a broader array of different companies, and there is like a bit of upfront investment, both from a marketing perspective, sales team perspective, and so on, right? I think there you could in one way, you could try to start really small, wait for your data and see if you could actually prove out like a case for it. And like that'd be like the very like finance-based approach. Sometimes like you just won't have data. It's going to take too long for you to actually get it. You just have to make a little bit more of this like conviction-driven bet to actually go get there. I think like the question is not necessarily like, do you do it or not do it? Like it's more of a question like, what is the appropriate size of upfront investment? And then how do you set up like the right systems in place to like measure whether these things are working or not? Where you have to like iterate and like where you do get confidence to be able to double down, or like sometimes like not all bets will work out, like shut things down as well. So rather than think about like, hey, should I go higher or not higher? I think it's more of this question of like, if you play poker, like what is the right size of bet relative to like conviction, the market opportunity that you think that actually exists, and then figure out how you like double down or like, potentially fold along the way.
Yeah, and I think there's some positions that are much easier to do this than others. Like with an engineering hire or design hire, it's hard to say, hey, I'm adding one more engineer and here's going to be the impact on revenue. That's usually really hard to actually predict. But when as people are closer to the kind of customers, that's easier. Like again, sellers are the easiest one to do this. And in the early days, I remember an instance where we were in a moment like this. We weren't sure whether this kind of additional customer facing sales hire would make a would make a difference enough for us that it makes sense. It was a brand new motion that we were testing out, and what we did is we were very honest with them in the interview process, and when we started, like, hey, we're gonna hire for you now, and it's going to be a 3 months contract to start. Here's the metrics for this to actually prove out to be a successful channel. And if you prove it to be a successful channel, it's going to become a full-time job and you're going to build up this team over the years. But if not, then, thank you for helping us do this experiment, but we're going to need to move on.
Great. Love that. Okay. Before we finish up, we've got 3 minutes. I have one more question. We are going to just throw a poll up really quick. Every one of these expert sessions that we do, we like to ask how useful it was to you. That's how we make sure that we're focusing on the right content, bringing in great speakers and guests. Thank you so much for jumping in on that. The last question that I have for you both is, how do you build a high performing team over time? Maybe that is something around aligning goals. Maybe it's something with the culture. Maybe it's systems. Like what comes to mind as like your one nugget of like, this is what I really believe creates a long-term high performing team?
If I had to,
people,
Dan, you go.
No, go for it, folks.
Okay, if I had to pick one thing is establishing trust in the team. I think when you have a team who trust one another, have a strong camaraderie and alignment on and clarity on what they want to achieve together, amazing things can happen.
I would say hire people with the right motivations. I think if you are hiring people who are just looking for their next big title or a pay bump, those people aren't going to work out. It takes a lot of work in the interview process to really suss out what they really care about. But usually, and I hate to use the word, but it's you kind of get a vibe of what they really care about and so on. And so really lean into that and kind of trust your gut in terms of whether you feel like someone is going to be kind of down for the ride and is really coming with the ownership mentality versus for a rocket ship policy.
Great. Thank you both so much. I am going to give everyone 1 minute back at the end of this because I just don't think we'll get through another question in 90 seconds, but it was really nice to have both of you here. Thank you so much. I learned a ton. It's always great to hear different leaders think about hiring because it's such a challenging thing because you're dealing with humans who have different motivations and different needs and different goals and different capabilities. So thank you again for your insights. We really appreciate it. I know the audience appreciates it as well. So have a good rest of your day, everyone, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.